we have a very small niche, Guillaume. I'll describe Dark Rhino this way then. When we're out hunting, we're not selling Timexes, which you can buy 20 of them for $10 or something, We are a Grand Seiko. It's a beautiful watch.
Today's guest is Manoj Tandon, CEO and co-founder of Dark Rhiino Security, a company laser-focused on protecting its clients through cutting-edge information security solutions. He's also the host of Security Confidential, a podcast featuring insightful conversations with cybersecurity and industry experts to educate and inform the community.
How do you think about this whole marketing branding mix for Dark Rhino and this podcast part of this?
The podcast is absolutely a part of it. We completely realize that creating a brand recognition in the market, and that brand recognition is getting us associated with some of the best minds in the industry. It is somewhat of a Red Bull play. We are sponsoring those rock stars, getting them out there. People are associating that with the Dark Rhino Security name. As a result, if you want a high-performance team, that's the mental association we're trying to build, right? We're selling outcomes. We're not selling tech. If we're going to truly sell outcomes, if we truly believe that a client's brand is a promise and we protect that promise, well, we need to flip it upside down. Let's begin with the end in mind. So the end is we need to protect their revenue chain. And that is what Dark Rhino sells.
And what are the things we can learn from what you're doing to be like, hey, okay, this is how you can further engage an existing client. You have the podcast and the newsletter at the front end. What happens afterward?
That is a really good question.
Welcome to the Consulting Leaders Podcast, where we talk about the business of consulting. Whether you're looking to grow your practice or learn from the stories of leaders in consulting, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Guillaume Jouvencel, ex-PwC and co-founder of GHA Marketing. Join me as I interview the best consultants in their niche. Let's get on with the show. Manoj, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Let's begin with your own podcast. Tell me your podcast story.
It started off as a passion project and remains as such. It's a podcast. We call it Security Confidential. Our aim on that show is to get some of the best leaders in the world on cybersecurity. And sometimes we get additional folks too. It's just not totally cyber, but we want to cover topics that are of interest to our audience. And keep in mind, our audience is a lot of practitioners of cybersecurity, a lot of small, medium businesses. And these folks typically can't afford to hire the type of resources and gain the knowledge that these folks who come onto the show, and we're grateful to them, are able to provide us. And we thought it's a great way to present what is the best trends in cyber, best techniques, tips, things that businesses and organizations should be considering as they're developing their own cybersecurity programs, and have a lot of fun doing it. It's not all technical. It's not all business. It's, there's so much about the personalities that come on the show that whether they believe it or not affects the solutions that they design. So it's very interesting to get that perspective. I think we've had close to we're over 180 episodes now. We've been very, very consistent, and we've been fortunate to have some of the who's who in the world of cybersecurity on the show from all over the world.
Exactly 222 episodes, actually. So pretty solid. So I love this. Can you tell me more about that passion project, Manoj? Because the reason I'm asking is, you have Dark Rhino next to it, right? So is that maybe also a passion project initially that transformed into a business?
Yeah, Dark Rhino is a business. We started this company 8 years ago, literally from scratch. It was absolutely an idea on a napkin. We were not VC funded. We put our own heart and soul into it. So yes, in that regard, is absolutely a passion project. And we built it up from zero. And as we were doing it, we noticed, a lot of our competition out there, everybody puts out a lot of the same materials. I mean, there's a lot of the same thing. It doesn't matter who you look at, it's a lot of the similar languages and things. And we're like, well, why don't we give something of real value back to the community, something they can use, instead of just going out there and saying, hey, look at us, buy from us, hey, we're the best. We can help you with risk, MDR, XDR, AI, whatever the flavor of the month is, right? And it's all kind of changes every day. Instead of doing that, real value is driven by real knowledge, Guillaume. We're like, how are we going to bring real knowledge to our client base and get them to trust us? I mean, we're asking them to help them with cybersecurity, which we view as a protection of their brand, a protection of their revenue chain. And that's what makes them who they are. So if they're going to give us that responsibility, they have to have faith in us. So that's where Security Confidential the seeds were planted, because instead of just putting stuff out there in marketing literature, getting real experts, providing real knowledge, they can understand, first of all, get educated themselves on what cybersecurity means, but also how it's evolving. And also, what we are doing is providing a mechanism by which they can execute it. So there's a little bit of a selfish drive there. But Dark Rhino Security is a company that started in 2017, and we're 8 years into it now, and we've been very successful. We're extremely grateful to all our clients. Without them, we would not be here. We have a very small niche, Guillaume. We're not the guys pushing out 8,000 transactions a month. Our customers, they are typically high risk, and they understand cyber and why you need specialists around it. And we like to believe we're doing things right because they keep coming back to us. So, the market is always the best judge.
Okay, there is so much to unpack here. Let's start with the beginning. So you interview the greatest mind in cybersecurity with the podcast, right? Who are your clients on Dark Rhino? Like, is there a link between the two, or is it more of a tool to build? It's like, I like to always take the analogy of Red Bull, right? Red Bull is an energy drink, but they sponsor the biggest, most craziest extreme sport events because they're like, hey, if Red Bull can fuel someone jumping off a plane without a parachute, whatever, it will for sure help you, right? It's same thing with North Face. Like, North Face sponsors series and websites and movies where they go all the way up to the Mount Everest, right? And they're like, if this will keep you warm on the Mount Everest, it will keep you warm in New York. Buy my stuff. So is that a similar play? Do you just use it to improve your own knowledge? What's the link between your clients and the podcast?
The link, in a nutshell, is that we're putting out real knowledge. And when we are prospecting, we can connect problems we see with the prospect with some of the things that were talked about on the show. But very much, I like your analogy. It is a Red Bull experience because I would be doing it anyways. Now I love doing it. It's not work to me to put that together. And the people who come on that show do it voluntarily. They're not getting paid, but sometimes they have books to sell, sometimes they have consulting to sell, as the case may be. That's okay. They're very knowledgeable people, and we let them have a platform on which to put that knowledge out. But it is somewhat of a Red Bull play. We are sponsoring those rock stars, getting them out there. People are associating that with the Dark Rhino Security name. And as a result, if you want a high performance team, that's the mental association we're trying to build, right?
No, and that makes a lot of sense. So is that, just to be clear, we started with a passion project as well, right? So I get it. Did it transform into this tool that you were like, actually, if we release, if we release 222 episodes with the greatest minds in cybersecurity, we will be seen as an expert? Was it deliberate at some point? Or did you start with that in mind? Like, I guess my deeper question is, how do you build a marketing strategy for a cybersecurity business? And the reason I'm asking this is it's vitamins, right? And everybody tells you, do not sell vitamins, sell painkillers. And the most interested people in cybersecurity are the ones who just went through an attack and had a loss. And they're like, now we need cybersecurity. But before that, they're like, yeah, sure, it's another expense that I don't want to incur. So how do you think about this whole marketing branding mix for Dark Rhino? And is podcast part of this?
The podcast is absolutely a part of it. And originally, when we started this, I'll stick to it, it was a passion project. It was a great way. It was like, let's do this. But then as it evolved, we completely realized that it is creating a brand recognition in the market, right? And that brand recognition is getting us associated with some of the best minds in the industry. Now, how do you leverage that? So when you look at what we do, we're unique. We're a strange bird, Guillaume, in some ways. We're oddballs as a cybersecurity company because most of our competitors, I'll just call them that, and there's some good companies in there, but what they will do is they're mostly selling technology. That is the name of the game. And all the OEMs are completely selling technology. That's end of story. They're not selling anything but that. They may claim otherwise, but I'm just saying it. I don't believe it. They're pushing boxes, and they need to push a lot of boxes to move their stock price. Fair enough. All right. What we're selling is outcomes. And that was something very different. When people go into, and now how do you do that? So, as a company, how do you essentially turn the pyramid upside down? Because most people will start, as an example, buy EDR, buy some kind of MDR then, and then buy some kind of cloud protection, phishing protection. And it's a staged, build up over time, multiple paths to the build up, but it's a staged build up. We said, no, let's not do that. If we're going to truly sell outcomes, if we truly believe that a client's brand is a promise and we protect that promise, well, we need to flip it upside down. Let's begin with the end in mind. So the end is operationally, we need to protect their revenue chain. We don't need to know how they do business. We don't need to play McKinsey or A.T. Kearney or somebody like that. But we need to understand the fundamental branches in that revenue chain, what people and process support it, and then what is the underlying technology. And then we build a defense in depth strategy around that, which is enabled by technology. But it's not a one size fits all solution. And what we discovered, one key element in all this was that when it's absolutely not, cybersecurity is not an IT problem, it is a business problem, it is a people problem. And the guests on our show, and if you go back and watch, if in fact, you can go to the vCISO app on our homepage and you can ask it this question: how many guests on the show have said cybersecurity is a business problem and it is not an IT problem? It is well over 140 people in that category. And that's when these light bulbs get going off, that these amazing folks are saying the same thing that we are actually trying to sell in the market, and connecting that dot that, look, some of the best hackers, the best red teamers, this is what they view the issue as. It's at its foundation a business problem and a people problem. Address those elements. We had a gentleman from the CIA on, and we had a Navy targeter on. That was her job, was to target people and then figure out how to compromise them in some way, shape, or form. And you know where they begin? They don't begin with, what is the firewall? What is the router this person is using? They're beginning with, what do they like? Who do they hang out with? How can I influence them in certain ways to act in a manner that will help me infiltrate their network, right? That's where they begin. And that mindset is something that we've been trying to get to market. I think I am hoping that the people who listen to the podcast are actually realizing that. And that's what we're selling, Guillaume. We're selling the outcome. That's what you don't want to be. You don't want to be the victim of targeting. If you understand what's important to you, protect that. Some of the other things, you make a conscious decision. I won't say not to protect, but maybe it's a less severe level of security on those things because you accept it. You're building a defense in depth approach very consciously that keeps you operationally alive if something bad happens. Those two get connected because I can tell you some of these experts have absolutely drilled that home. They said, you guys really need to look at your people and process first and do some fundamental things. Have good policies in place. Don't penalize people if they click on the wrong link. Make your organization friendly to report bad behaviors to. Change the structure of your organization. Instead of having the CISO report to your CIO, have them report independently. These are just some of I can't remember everything, but there were a lot of fundamental themes that kept repeating again and again and again and again. And they're right. I'm not going to argue with them. I mean, these guys know what they're doing. And the podcast has been very complimentary in that it is absolutely talking about outcomes. And that is what Dark Rhino sells. We're selling outcomes. We're not selling tech.
I like that a lot. Okay, there is again so much to unpack here, Manoj.
That was a long answer. I'm sorry, Guillaume.
But that's good. But that's the whole point. Like the question, right, to remind the audience was how do you blend marketing, branding for a product that initially is more of a vitamin than a painkiller, except if you just went through a lot of pain, cyber attack. And what I really like about your answer, Manoj, is that you really enter deep into we need to understand that this is a business problem, a people problem, would I say, in the sense of like most of the breaches are going to come from people. So how do we build a system and the infrastructure around that to avoid people misbehaving or like leading to a cyber attack? And I guess if I understand your answer correctly, it's about educating the marketplace in the first place, explaining where the issue is coming from, highlighting like, hey, those are the quick wins that you can potentially implement and think of. That's something you do with the podcast. If you have someone from the CIA coming on the show explaining how to, resist a potential cyber attack, I guess that's a good enough authority, I would guess.
I would say, I mean, where else are you going to go?
Exactly. Like if the CIA can't get it right, then, well, take us already. It's over. So no, I like it a lot. How do you go from education, right, through education within your marketing, not trying to sell tech, but actually showing like, hey, here is the value. We can help you unlock it if you'd like. But if you want to do it yourself, go ahead. 222 episodes as resources for you to do it. How do you go from that to actually signing a new client? I know you're not at 8 billion transactions a month yet, but like, how do you do that? How do you take people from potentially listening to the podcast, guesting on it, to Manoj, I want to work with you. Here is a letter of engagement.
You know what happens, Guillaume, is that when they listen and there is something that they self-identify with, that's very important. So you know how people sell on fear in the industry, and you've described that very well. So if you're not going to sell on fear and you're going to sell on knowledge, then what needs to happen is that the client or potential client needs to self-identify. So they self-identify with a topic or something that was said in a particular episode or materials that the guest put out there. And then they come back and they want to ask more questions around that or understand better. What does this mean? And now that is our opening to start a conversation with them. And from there, it becomes like this conversation, it becomes a natural progression because once they start asking questions, then they are mentally engaged. And if we do our jobs right, we can guide them to various potential ways to address the topic. And then it stands to reason that if they view us as the expert, then eventually the transaction happens. Now, it is a longer sales cycle. It can take us 6 months to a year to convert a lead like that, right? But it's going to be solid and it's built on a relationship that was established, not on a mass volumes campaign, that somebody was just trying to check the box on. Because it typically happens. I'll give you an example. We compliance is a big thing. Okay. Most of the industry, and not just forget about the cybersecurity industry, most of the potential clients out and prospects out there all view it as a checkbox, right? And that is a horrible way to build a cybersecurity program. What we're saying is if you do cybersecurity right, compliance is going to be a natural outcome of it. So we've had so many guests that have talked about that, and they come back and say, what the heck are you talking about, man? My boss wants me to get us to SOC 2 Type 1 compliance. now. And then a year later, we were going for SOC 2 Type 2. And that is my measure. I'm like, well, that's great. So this is also an opportunity for you to actually get the appropriate funding to build the right underpinnings of an infrastructure where SOC 2 is a natural outcome. You have all the auditable controls in place. And then we get into the details of it, and it takes several conversations to walk them through how we did it for our own company. We are SOC 2 compliant, right? What does that entail? And I'm just picking that example. It could be CMMC, it could be HIPAA. We've had clients help them achieve high trust compliance, you know, but we didn't go with the checkbox approach in all those instances. We said, let's build the right control sets. Then what the auditors are going to be looking for is naturally going to be there anyways. And it's going to be there in a much better way that is sustainable. And if it's sustainable, then you have resilience, Guillaume. And if you have resilience, well, then you've done the best you could, which is what you should do.
Always do the best you can. So that's how you take them from listeners, audience, people listening to you to, hey, let's work together if there is a need.
We also put out a newsletter. Well, we're going to be more consistent with that. That's part of the process, is that if people start engaging and subscribe, they're part of our newsletter, and they're just getting good information. It's not Dark Rhino putting out here, this month we got a special going, buy this from us, or, blah, blah, blah. We're saying, hey, look, this recently Land Rover Jaguar was in the news, right? Huge company. But in your instance, look at some of the common elements and see if you have vulnerabilities in this area. And that's just part of it. And then link a guest episode where a real expert talked about some of these things in sound bites, very short sound bites. It sparks someone's curiosity and they reach out and they say, hey, what the heck are you talking about? Like, all right, that's a great question. Now let's get into this.
I love this. So that's something we often talk on the show. Podcast is amazing. It must not be the only stone that you build your foundations from. It's me completely making up English expressions here. But like when you link it to other touch points in other formats that are going to hit different brain centers, taking clips out of it, relevant ones, not necessarily like a short, like for TikTok that is 30 seconds where you dance a bit at the same time, but something in depth, 2-3 minutes on a specific topic, specific niche, expert guest. This is where the real transformation happens. And this is when people start taking action or being like, okay, there is something happening here. I'm getting my sound bites. I'm getting my long form episode if I need to. I'm getting those newsletters. And this is where the magic and the engagement happens.
That's where the engagement, so we're starting with a warm engagement, Guillaume. I guess if you were to summarize it, the podcast gives us a mechanism to start a new engagement warm rather than as a pure cold outreach.
Amen to that. So another question I'm interested in getting your take on, Manoj, is you've made it, right? You built an audience, you've built a marketing strategy that works, converts, you get the client in. I think something I learned at PwC, right? From the partner that I was quite close with. He was like, Guillaume, there are two types of consultants out there. There are the hunters and there are the farmers. I'm a hunter. I love to go after new business. But the real money is farming. When you onboard someone, you get the first engagement, you deliver good value, you build trust, and then you're like, so guys, here is the roadmap for the next, 12 to 60 months. You can implement it yourself through the partners, or since we already have a relationship and hey, we built it, so we know how to implement it, let's work further together. And you get other consulting engagement as you go. I guess from your perspective, how do you do that in cybersecurity, if at all? And what are the things we can learn from what you're doing to be like, hey, okay, this is how you can further engage an existing client? You have the podcast and the newsletter at the front end. What happens afterwards?
That is a really good question. And we do both hunting and farming. No company can survive or grow without doing both. And I will say farming, as you have described it, is absolutely a goal. It is a goal inside the organization in that we want to further build a relationship with our client, right? And deepen it over time. And we do it with patience. We do it with a lot of education and we avoid doing unnecessary things that they simply do not need. And as a small company, we can actually do that because we're not bound to shareholders. We're not bound to a quarterly result. We're just bound to protecting their brand. And that's where we put our money at, and so we do a lot of the farming happens, but the farming exercise, one thing we've done, and then I'll go to hunting. On the farming side, what's unique about us that we did because is that the entire company is a part of it. Although we don't call them farmers. So the tech people, everybody is taught how to engage with a client with gratitude, respect, professionalism, because if the client doesn't experience those things, then they're not going to want to grow with you. So even our technical engineers who are not doing any selling, but they absolutely are. It's how they engage, how they deliver, and thus they are a part of the farming component, even though their job description doesn't say salesperson or whatnot. But if they mess it up or they don't treat the customer well, there's going to be no farming. Hunting is a game of patience. And in this market, and it's a saturated market because there are OEM players, consulting companies, MSPs, MSSPs. Last time we counted 45,000 MSPs in North America alone, 1,500 MSSPs in North America alone. And that's not counting Accenture, Deloitte, IBM, Dell SecureWorks, all Verizon, the big companies, right? It's a hugely saturated market. So you have to position yourself well in that. And one thing we did, and this directly relates to the hunting, is that we decided we're going to have a niche. We tried early on to cast a broad net and be the, for lack of a better term, the CrowdStrikes of the world. Just we got something for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, right? We're not that Mandiant or the ultra high end level of consultancy. So we have a niche where we help people by delivering a lot of value through cybersecurity with a lot of personalized service, and we become an extension of their organization. There's a smaller market for it, but it exists. Are you into fine watches, Guillaume?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll describe Dark Rhino this way then. When we're out hunting, we're not selling Timexes, which you can go to Walmart and your local store and you could buy 20 of them for $10 or something, We're also not selling the Patek Philippe yet. We are a Grand Seiko. It's a beautiful watch. You know what? The Grand Seiko buyer knows what they want. They are not getting educated. They know what a Patek is. They know what a Timex is. And they know a lot of other things in between. But they know exactly what they want. And the most important thing they know is value.
That could have not been a better analogy. I love this, Manoj. So I think that's the thing about consulting, and especially more in cybersecurity. The most successful consultants that we see are extremely clear on who they're serving, right? And how they are serving them. Because if you're able to describe the pain points of your ideal clients better than they are, you've already won. And then it's just about a question of time. Back to one of the things you mentioned at the beginning is like long sales cycles. And I think we're all facing that, and it's gonna go towards that because there is a guest that told me that I loved it. She mentioned we are in a trust recession. Anybody can claim anything on the internet nowadays. So it's all about building that trust beforehand. People check more and more testimonials, case studies, content. Are you talking to the right people? Are you talking the right way? And then are you able to describe my pain points and my desired outcomes better than I would? And then it's delivering on that consistently. And it's boring. Honestly, it's quite boring, but this is what works. So maybe a curveball for you, Manoj, here. You're doing lots of things right. You have clearly nailed consistency, right? You're in business for 8 years. You've been doing the podcast for 6, like quite consistently. Where do you feel stuck? Where do you feel you could potentially act on so that it would unlock the next level of growth? I'm asking because that might shine a light on the problem that people listening to us have right now. They're like, oh, that's true. Actually, that's me. If I unlock this, I go to the next level. What would that be for you?
Two pieces to that. First piece is building out a much better attribute set that we can identify publicly on what a good prospect looks like. Okay. So we know what our clients, what their pain points are. We know them very well and we service them very well. But if we're going to expand and expedite the expansion, we have to be able to find the same attribute set in the broader market efficiently and at volume. And that is a non-trivial exercise, which interestingly, in the last quarter or so, we have been doing a lot with AI and the various LLMs, and it is showing a lot of promise in that area because it's able to do a lot of agentic AI is able to do a lot of fundamental research that would take a human being hours and weeks and days to do. So that's part one. I have to be very good at identifying who the grand Seiko buyer is. you know, once you have a good way to do that, then it is a matter of reaching out to them at scale and starting with, and we're leading with the podcast there. It's like we're saying, hey, look, we understand you care about cybersecurity. We've been around for a long time. This is a podcast that deals with some of the world's best people in the industry. You might want to take a listen. Here's a list, subscribe on Spotify or iTunes or whatever Apple Podcasts, as the case may be. And we try and starting that at scale. What we have been good at doing is doing that at a niche level really well. Like we do a lot of networking. And before we go to a networking event, if we can get a list of potential people who will attend, we'll pre-send them some of this information. And then we have a chance to meet them one-on-one. And that gives us the opening to then add upon that and build that relationship and go from there. And that has worked really well for us, but it's not at scale. If we want to do this at scale, and that's what we need to unlock then, is that we need to get a very repeatable multi-touch sales process that is warm lead based, not cold call based, up and running. And there's a lot of complexities to that actually, because you identify the right people, then you have to have the right messaging sets that go with those right people that happen in a set rhythmic cadence over time. And quite frankly, it's also very expensive to do. I mean, so there's a little bit of monetary resources that are involved with the whole cycle that if we had found a cheaper way to do it, we would definitely do it because we haven't taken the VC funding. Somewhere, if we would have taken VC funding, that's where we would have put that money, would have been in scalable sales development because we know what works now. We know what packages work. We know what conversation works. Now you got to get it out to the masses, but efficiently.
Oh, I get it. Attribution is one of the hardest thing in marketing. When you unlock it, though, it works really, really well. And that's just the first step, right? When you have like multiple touches, because again, people don't just see a short on TikTok or YouTube short, Instagram, whatever, and they say, "Oh my God, I'm going to spend 5 figures."
No, they're not.
Exactly. It's like, okay, this guy is popping up once, twice, 3 times on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever your jam is. And then they listen to a podcast where you're featured or where you're featuring a great guest and they're like, interesting. Then they read something, they join the newsletter, they read it, they see you again, and then they click on a button and you think, oh, okay, it was my Google ad. No, but that doesn't take into account everything that happened beforehand, which is all the engagement and the value that you've provided before they arrive to the call. That's an interesting one. So yeah, I mean, consultants are big on going to conferences, obviously. Following up with the podcast is a good thing, I think. But then having that system to attribute is a bit of a pickle. I agree.
That is a challenge. And if you have any good ideas on that, I'm open ears on it. Attribution is very difficult to find the right target because we don't want to just send it out. As an example, I'll just say us sending a note to the CISO of IBM is a colossal waste of time. that person is not going to care. They're going to get a call from Accenture or Deloitte or PwC or somebody, right? And that's not our market. We're not selling there.
I don't know if you can do that with your podcast. Maybe a parallel podcast could be interesting. So what I used to do with my previous podcast, Corporate Treasury 101, I was going to those conferences, and it was a general podcast around education on corporate treasury, a niche in finance. And when there were people that I thought we could do business with, or that I could benefit from the audience of, or that my audience would benefit from, obviously, it always needs to be genuine, otherwise it doesn't work. But so you meet those people at conferences. Obviously, they meet another, dozen, if not hundreds of people like you, or like they have like everybody has gazillions of follow-ups to do after a conference. The way we stood out and the way I think this podcast became the number one podcast in the space for 2 years in a row is because one of the follow-up we had at those conferences was like, hey, look, I would love to continue the conversation, but first I'd like to learn more about you. Like, you should come on the show. And usually it's an ego stroke, right? People are happy about that. And they're like, sure, like, but how would I contribute? And like, okay, so we can talk about XYZ. The podcast is for that. This is the audience. And now you have a touch point in a much more one-on-one format than the conference, right? Where you have 1 hour with the person and you can bond, propose them some follow-ups afterwards, connect them to other people. That could be one way. Manoj, I don't know if that's something you've considered in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. And we actually have done some business with the podcast guests. We have, and they're good relationships.
Here we go. So that's something that happens. Genuinely, I think it needs to be about that first. So it needs to be about the audience and the value. It needs to be about the relationship. And then if something can happen, then so be it. The only reason I was like, maybe it would need to be another podcast for you, but apparently you've done it already, is like, if you interview some big time guests, like, I don't know, ex-CIA, like people who have a much bigger profile that you're not directly going to work with, but more like are interviewing for thought leadership. That's why you don't want to confuse the audience too much, but it's a very powerful tool as well. So both are very good. Anything that I didn't ask you, Manoj, that I should have had, because obviously this conversation is gold, and I think the audience will learn a lot from that.
One thing I'll say is that in spite of all the automation, AI, all the tools that we have, I still, and this is just my opinion, feel very strongly as the CEO of the company that business is still done based on relationships. And in our industry, it's exceedingly more difficult to do, and it's ironic because if there is an incident in cyber, you don't want to talk to an AI-based SOC. You don't want to talk to a chatbot and open a ticket. I can assure you of that. If you are operationally in trouble, you don't want to be talking to a help desk or an automated system. You want to be talking to real intelligence, a human being that can service you. And that has actually played to our advantage because so much of the market has gone to, well, we just don't want to talk to the people. Well, if you don't want to, we make it a point to go out and meet all our customers at least once a year. If you can't have that relationship, and when things go wrong, and they do go wrong, I mean, it's just the nature of things, then they want to know that they can pick up the phone and call Guillaume, call Manoj, call Engineer X, and someone's going to pick it up and someone has their back. And in cyber, that's why you're hiring companies, is because you want someone to have your back. So I think fostering those relationships is important. Of course, the market is huge and there's all kinds of buyers, but we're focusing very much on what I'm talking about is that value-oriented buyer. The commoditized buyer doesn't care. They don't really care. They're checking boxes, lowest cost wins. Good. Maybe that works for you. Have fun. That's not our cup of tea, and we're not serving it.
I think what you hit on right now is so important. An email that I send to anybody joining my newsletter, because we do have a newsletter as well, it's bloody effective. One of the email, I don't know if it's like sequence 20 or 21, is like, here is why I think, personal opinion, podcast will prevail in the age of AI. At the end of the day, for sure, there are like tons of optimization you can make with AI, and it is going to help you automate a lot of stuff, and it is going to make you win time and money. But at the end of the day, and that's also why conferences are exploding right now, is because people, especially after COVID, people crave this human connection, and people buy from people they trust. And that's like non-scalable aspect of the human relationship, because it is hard to scale. is so bloody important. Pardon my French. Call it French privilege in the relationship. I couldn't agree more. Manoj, I absolutely love that. If people want to find out more about you, about your podcast, about your business, where should they go?
They should go to darkrhinosecurity.com. The Rhino is spelled with 2 I's, by the way. Double INO is invested in outcomes. So go there, click the link, or call us directly, 614-401-3025. There will be a human that picks up the phone. Or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Be happy to connect with anyone. We love talking to people.
We'll put all the links in the description, including your phone number. You're sure about that, Manoj? I'm happy to, huh?
Yeah, go right ahead. Absolutely. A reception person is really good. They will take care of it.
And you have your first connection from this podcast, which is me on LinkedIn. Manoj, thank you so much for coming on the show and looking forward to publishing this one.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Leaders Podcast. We hope you learned valuable lessons on how to grow your practice and take your business to the next level. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this show so you never miss an episode. To apply and be a guest on the show, click the link in the description. See you next time.